It's the late 1980s, and the McDonald sisters dabbled in a lot of things during their youth. From roller skating to boy band concerts to smoking cigarettes, it seemed that they were always looking for a little something to give them a bit of a rush. But when they started dabbling and conjuring up demonic forces, they found out the hard way that when you go knocking on Satan's door, sometimes Satan answers. This is the story of the McDonald sisters, 4 girls who grew up in the suburbs of Pittsburgh. Like many suburban kids, the McDonald sisters were prone to a little rebelling. And what they chose to rebel against was the heavy Christian upbringing they had as kids. They started holding late-night seances. At first, they tried to conjure up the spirit of their great-grandmother, but didn't have any success. The sisters began to discuss whether or not this wasn't working because they were doing something wrong or because there was simply no such thing as spirits, and when you're dead, you're dead. They tried several more nights, but nothing happened. Then, one of the sisters got an idea. They would try to conjure up a demon, so they went into their room and held hands and closed their eyes. They began calling for a spirit from the demonic world to break into their world. They used some chants and spells they had learned on the internet and began chanting. Suddenly, one of the girls began convulsing, and her eyes rolled white. She began speaking in a deep, unsettling voice. She said,
"You have awakened us from a 10,000-year slumber."
They all felt exhilarated. They all agreed that something supernatural definitely went down, but they weren't sure exactly what. They were fascinated that they just made contact with a supernatural entity and were now even more curious than before. They decided to step their game up and have an actual satanic ritual. They built an altar in their room and downloaded satanic rites from the internet. The oldest sister got on the altar while the others read the rites. As the ritual went on, the older sister had become highly aroused, as if a mystical, supernatural entity had entered her and was charging her up from the inside, turning her on, making her hot. She began writhing in ecstasy, arching her back and wriggling around in pleasure. She described the pleasure like this. It was so intense, I felt like I was having 1,000 orgasms all at once. It was like a tingling happening inside, like deep, deep inside. And it started to spread throughout my body, through my limbs, and ultimately into my soul. I felt like this tingling was getting so intense, and I started to get all hot and wet, and I just couldn't control myself. I just wanted it to never, ever end. It was the hottest and most pleasurable thing I've ever felt. The ritual went on for several hours, and the older sister remained on the altar the entire time. The other girls also felt something in the room, something supernatural. One of them described it like this. When I read the incantation, I remember it was like I wasn't even reading, like I was being controlled by something in the room. I wanted to actually stop, but this thing, this force, just kept making me go on, reading this thing over and over again. I think we were in that room for like 3 hours just reading over and over, and nobody said stop. Or, hey, shouldn't we call it a night? We all just kept reading and chanting as if there was no controlling it or stopping it. That's when it got scary. When I felt like I was no longer in control, that's the point when I realized we had gone too far. Afterwards, the girls all began to suffer from terrible nightmares. Dreams so violent, and so awful that they would thrash in their beds and wake up screaming in the middle of the night. At first, the girls didn't reveal to each other that they were being plagued by nightmares, but the one girl brought it up, and suddenly they all realized they were having similar dreams. The dreams would almost always involve the sisters committing acts of violence towards each other. One of the girls said in her dreams they would beat each other up, often fighting to the death and leaving each other bloody. In one dream, one sister kept seeing herself stab her other sister over and over again. She would dream they were performing a ceremony and she was plunging a sacrificial knife into her sister's writhing body over and over again. Sometimes she would keep stabbing her, many times in the same dream, and her sister would not die, no matter how many times she plunged the knife into her heart. She remembers hearing her sisters scream so vividly in the dream that she started plunging the knife in out of sheer mercy, just to put her sister out of her misery. But each time she plunged the knife into her sister's struggling body, her sister would not die, but she would just continue to writhe in agony with each swing of the blade. This imagery became burned into her head after she woke up. And she said during the day, when she was at school, she would start to envision herself stabbing and killing her classmates and her teachers. Another girl said her dreams involved them shooting each other. She said night after night, she would dream that the sisters all had guns and that they would get into a gunfight and shoot each other dead. These dreams freaked out the girls, especially because of the similarities. They all realized that the dream started when they began dabbling in the supernatural and invited those demons into their world. But this did not deter the girls from their supernatural activities. It only emboldened them. Their curiosity about the supernatural was not going to be squashed. All those years of praying to God and feeling like their prayers were going unanswered, and now, suddenly, they appeal to Satan, and his demons are showing up and manifesting themselves in their room. The girls were ecstatic. They continued with their satanic rites, and once again, the presence of demonic forces were felt in the room by all 4 girls. But this time, their mother walked into the room and was horrified at what she saw. She immediately called her pastor. Their mother was part of a deliverance ministry, a Christian church that regularly drives demons out of its congregation. These deliverance sessions are usually done in church. However, there was no chance of getting these 4 girls to step foot in a church. They were already in servitude to Satan, so the pastor made a house call, which sometimes deliverance ministries have been known to do. As soon as he came into the girls' room, they started freaking out. The pastor began casting the demon out, and the girls suddenly started writhing on the floor. The deliverance of these 4 girls was now underway. Deliverance ministry involves prayers and spiritual practices aimed at freeing individuals from demonic influence, oppression, or possession, with the goal of restoring them to a state of peace and freedom. While the term is often used interchangeably with exorcism, exorcism is a more formal, ritualistic process performed by trained clergy, like Catholic priests, using specific rites and sacramentals like holy water. In contrast, deliverance ministry can be a broader term encompassing various approaches, from individual prayer and counseling to public altar ministry and house calls, and is performed by a wider range of ministers and even lay Christians. Deliverance involves praying for the individual and commanding evil spirits to depart in the name of Jesus Christ, according to the teachings of many Christian traditions. Deliverance ministers often focus on inner healing, addressing emotional wounds, and providing counseling as part of a broader program to set the person free. The modern deliverance ministry has strong opposition from both within and outside Christian communities. Critics raise concerns over its potential for psychological and spiritual harm, while advocates contend that it is a necessary biblical practice for freeing believers from demonic influence. Deliverance ministries often teach that Christians can be afflicted by demons, an idea known as demonization or oppression. Many other Christian theologians strongly dispute this, arguing that the Holy Spirit's indwelling makes it impossible for believers to be controlled by evil spirits. Some critics believe that modern deliverance teachings undermine the sufficiency of Christ's work on the cross. They contend that Jesus' sacrifice fully defeated sin and evil, and that seeking further deliverance suggests his victory was incomplete. Critics argue that many deliverance practices, such as interviewing demons for information or focusing on uncovering generational curses, lack biblical support. They stress that the Bible directs believers to resist the devil and focus on Christ's authority, not to engage in dialogue with demonic entities. Opponents argue that deliverance ministries are often driven by fear, fixating on the power of demons and the possibility of spiritual attacks. This fear-based approach can overshadow the gospel's message of grace, leading believers into a form of spiritual bondage where they constantly worry about sin inviting demons back into their lives. A significant modern concern is that deliverance ministries often misdiagnose mental health issues, trauma, or addiction as demonic activity. This can prevent individuals from seeking professional medical or psychological help, potentially causing severe harm. Testimonies from former participants describe how deliverance practices can be abused within cultic settings. In these environments, leaders may use the ministry to gain power, control over followers, and access to their personal information under the guise of finding demonic entry points. The emotionally charged and dramatic nature of some exorcism-like sessions can be deeply distressing, especially for people with past trauma. The spectacle can be psychologically overwhelming and do more harm than good. Unlike some more traditional religious traditions that require formal permission and training for exorcism, modern deliverance ministries often lack consistent regulation or standardized procedures. This means ministers may operate with minimal knowledge of psychology or proper pastoral care, leading to potentially dangerous and reckless practices. Some ministries are accused of exploiting vulnerable individuals for financial gain, with fees being charged for deliverance or participants being encouraged to make large donations. Critics argue that an overemphasis on demonic causes for all problems promotes a low view of human responsibility for personal choices and sins. A more balanced view, they argue, acknowledges that while Satan is real, not all suffering is demonic in origin, and believers must still mature in their faith to overcome the flesh. Arguments for deliverance ministries are primarily based on interpretations of biblical passages that describe Jesus and his apostles casting out demons, as well as the belief that demonic forces can oppress or afflict believers. Proponents assert that spiritual freedom is a necessary part of the Christian life, and that this ministry continues the work of Christ. Deliverance ministers point to numerous instances in the Gospels where Jesus cast out evil spirits. They believe that if Jesus himself performed these acts, then his followers today are called to do the same. Arguments are made that the authority Jesus gave his disciples to drive out demons was passed down to the church to be exercised by believers today in faith. Advocates argue that many modern problems, including some mental, emotional, and physical ailments, have spiritual roots. Many deliverance models combine spiritual practices like casting out demons with inner healing, which addresses emotional wounds that may have provided demons with a legal right or foothold. Ministers claim to use spiritual discernment to differentiate between psychological struggles and genuine spiritual attacks, advocating for a holistic approach that may also involve professional, medical, or psychological help. Deliverance ministry is presented as a means of helping Christians find freedom from persistent sins, addictions, and destructive patterns of behavior that they have been unable to overcome by other means. After the girls' deliverance was over, their mother found and burned their Ouija board, their witchcraft tools, their altar, and their satanic paraphernalia. While she was at it, she also burned their movie collection, all of their black clothing, and their entire record collection, including their boy band records.